Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 132. Miele had been right. Mistress Dovell had not been pleased with her lack of decorum and her haphazard appearance. The newest punishment had been 3 lashes from the stocks where the peasantry could witness her humiliation in full view of the great latticed windows of the keep. Should any nobles care to watch, free of any unpleasantness that would come from sharing a square with the lower classes, elbow to elbow. Miele had taken the news with aplomb, although her mind raced. Had she been discovered? Pavitt had no affiliations to her knowledge, with any sense of the spy masters, but she could never be absolutely sure. The poison that had taken his life may have been meant for her. Was she safe then, now that he had been murdered? No, it could just as easily have been a ploy to trick her into bolting. If they knew she had been hired as an assassin, they could merely be waiting to see who she would lead them to before snuffing her out. Better to be careful. She would not reach out again to her handler unless she was absolutely desperate. The man himself could choose to end her contract. She would go through with the lashings. Miele ran her fingers over the delicate, pale skin of her back. The pain would take the breath from her, and would hamper her movements. Was it too bold to seek refuge with Azric? Or would he simply remove her to avoid showing weakness to his enemies? She could not be certain. She could survive this, but she would be at the mercy of the other woman as long as she was kept in the stocks. Miele didn't like surrendering any form of control. Her very life could be forfeit if she guessed wrong. She looked out one of the keep's windows, down at the square below. Already, servants were moving to carry the heavy metal stocks into position. A small crowd had gathered. Others were sure to follow. Rotten fruit and refuse would be the crowd's tools of choice. If she was unlucky, rocks could follow, although hopefully the guards would prevent her untimely death. She stood there, unmoving, the horror spreading through her midsection. Dovell had been predictably vicious, but this she had not been prepared for. Soon they would come for her, ensuring no escape from her fate. Miele wavered. It was time to put Azric's favor to the test. She made her way to his chambers, passing servants with shocked expressions on their faces. Her face colored, but she did not make eye contact with them. Better for them to think her abashed. She prayed he would be in his quarters and not off on some other errand. What could she say to him? Please, save me from this humiliation. The thought was laughable. He was known for being a cold, calculating man, and yet she had felt heat from him. If she gambled and failed, her fate would be locked in stone. Don't think about that now. Finding the door to his rooms open, she heaved a closely held breath, her pulse quickening. As she crossed the doorway, she saw he was not alone. Another woman met her eyes. Young and pretty, the woman standing there left Miele no doubt of what had recently transpired. To presume Lord Azric's attention while he entertained a guest was unthinkable. And yet, Miele could not stop herself from moving farther into the room. What was wrong with her? Was she bereft of her senses? The other woman smiled at her. It was not friendly. Azric stood with his back to them both, fitting the cuffs about his wrists with worked golden pins that held his family crest. 2 other servants stood at the ready, prepared to step in at a moment's notice, should he request assistance. Miele, how impudent of you, the other woman said. Are you not aware these are the Lord's own rooms? The woman, another servant, if finely garbed, carried a casual arrogance as she spoke. Azric did not turn, nor show any sign of interest at the interruption. After pausing to see if Lord Azric would rebuke Miele, the other woman continued, her voice showing a hint of annoyance. What business do you have here, then? Out with it, girl! Miele moved past the woman, paying no more attention to her than a block of wood. Lord Azric, I beg of you. They are to put me in the stocks at present. Please, I throw myself on your mercy. Miele bent to kneel before him. waiting for him to turn towards her. She heard an indelicate laugh from the other woman. The whore may be dressed in fine silks, but it did not change her nature. Miele held herself rigid, awaiting judgment. Asric still did not turn. A small flick of his hands sent the servants from the room in silent retreat. After a pause, Asric spoke unhurriedly, but Miele could detect a hint of irritation. "Dana, you may leave us." The other woman bristled, but managed to keep it from her face. She bobbed a quick curtsy and backed away out of the room. Once they were alone, he spoke. "Give me reason. Why should I do this?" Asric's voice was cold and hard, but his features had softened considerably. "Please, my lord, Dovell seeks to be my undoing. I had thought, since we—" Miele looked away. She had to execute this just right. He would want her to express shame, remorse. It was a pity. She had expected more of this man. She had admired his unwillingness to break his principles, even if they led him to commit murder. That was a man she could understand. Her own soul was no less tainted with vile deeds. Asric looked on. This woman, her raven hair, her eyes like shining beads of midnight, the slope of her breasts, he could feel his desire rise, something primal, just seeing her before him. He had been so sure she was the assassin come to take his life. But then she had come to him willingly again. Why? He did not believe her to be weak. Why the act? What did Dovell think of this woman? "Come to me." His voice was iron hard, and he saw her hesitate. Would she crawl or stand? She stood. What reason would he have for staying Dovell's hand? He cared nothing for her, and yet there was something about her, some reaction that she evoked in him. He considered. If Asric chose to prevent her punishment, he would be seen to be giving this woman his favor. That would mean an exploitable weakness. But he did not care what happened to her. If his enemies thought they could use her to get to him, they would be sorely mistaken. However, it would divert their attention. This is something his father would have realized immediately, were he still alive. Smiling, Asric spoke. "I will send an emissary to Dovell. She has been too callous in her desires to punish my servants." He reached out to Miele, and she stepped into him, meeting him in a sensual embrace. Her mouth sought his. Absently, he pulled a rope with a bell to summon a servant, and then pulled her to the giant four-poster bed. He breathed in deep and lost himself in the scent of her. She moved pliably, the open door forgotten. If Asric's enemies thought to send others in Miele's place to control him through his sexual appetite, well, they would find him an obstinate opponent. Asric felt the heat of Miele's body press against his, and he drew the drapes of the four-poster bed closed around them.